Guys, let's watch leadership development on stage right now. On the main stage, Miss Amanda Garthwaite.
I am not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say, no one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious.
First impressions matter. A Harvard research study states that snap judgments work and can be remarkably accurate. I invite you now to take a moment to make a snap judgment of me and what you think my story is. Now I'm going to tell you my story, which may be quite different from your snap judgment. I was born to Barbara and Rusty, short for Robert, in a big town in northern New Jersey, a town of upper middle class, white picket fence, perfect families. But our picture-perfect family was anything but perfect. Growing up, both of my parents were alcoholics, and one of my very first memories is of them arguing. We lived in a ranch with a finished basement that, of course, had a bar, and my bedroom was only a few steps away from the stairs that took you to that bar. I vividly remember the sound of my dad's feet slamming against the stairs coming up from our basement, yelling, "Get off my back, Barbara." It was 2 a.m. and they were drunk and arguing again. Not long after that, my parents filed for divorce, and my mom moved us to the next town over that same year. I got asked not to return to my soccer team I had played for 3 years because my coach thought my parents' divorce might make the kids on our picture-perfect team in our picture-perfect town uncomfortable. You see, in our upper middle-class town, divorce was still taboo and not something that happened to us. I was 7 years old. 2 years later, on a Friday the 13th in October, my mom picked my brother and I up early from school. We rode silently to the next town over to our little house, where several of our family members waited for us. We entered our small living room, and my aunt, uncle, and cousins were all staring at us. It was obvious that they had been crying. My older sister, Christina, who arrived before us, was sitting on the stairs to the attic with her face in her hands. My mom looked at my brother and I and said, "Your dad has been missing for several days." But before she could finish her sentence, Christina blurted out, "Dad's dead, isn't he?" At 9 years old, I found out my father had committed suicide. For the next 10 years, life was okay. I was invited back to that soccer team, and we went on to win championships and break records. It was good. Aside from the occasional birthday party my mom would at the last minute tell me I couldn't go to because she was either too drunk to drive me or because she said so, which would ultimately result in dirty looks and gossip that following Monday. But I survived, of course, with a little help from a few friends that knew what my life was actually like and would tell the gossipers to shut up on my behalf. Finally, it was June 2009. I had made it through high school, although I was living on my own for the first few months. I managed to pass and get a scholarship to Elmira University. I was on my way out of that town, away from the gossip about my family, and away from my mother. July 2009, my big plans to get out came to a screeching halt. Days after paying my tuition commitment, I found out I was pregnant. I was 18 years old, without my mom to lean on, and without a clue what to do. But it didn't take long for me to realize that my son would be the greatest thing to ever happen to me. 2 years after my son was born, I met a man I thought would be my forever. We were married 3 years later and bought a house a few years after that. I thought I would have the dream. A nice house with 2.5 kids. Not sure what I was going to do with the 0.5, but you get it. A white picket fence and a dog. But that dream quickly became a nightmare. Shortly after we were married, my husband became an alcoholic, and I found myself thrown back into a life I had worked so hard to run away from. The arguing was just like what I remembered as a child, but instead, this time, my son was sitting right where I was 20 years earlier. And it wasn't until the night that ended with me black and blue from my forehead to my cheek that I realized I couldn't fix him. It was the next morning, sitting on my couch, crying at the sight of my own reflection in the mirror, that I knew something had to change. A few weeks later, my 29-year-old husband died of cirrhosis of the liver, and at 27, I became a widow. At this point, you're probably thinking, geez, lady, where's the silver lining? And I promise it's coming. But first, I want to impart to you some Amanda life lessons, because I know that as I stand here in a room filled with some of dentistry's brightest leaders, that we all go through crap, and we all get stuck in it sometimes. And even when we think we shouldn't, because we're the ones that everyone comes to when they need help. In my short 25-ish years, I've learned to follow 3 rules that I want to share with you today. The first one is you are allowed to have a bad day, but you are not allowed to unpack and live there. And if you're a practice manager in my region, or if I was your practice manager at some point, you've most likely heard me say this to someone, or I've said it to you during times of stress. So what does it mean? It means that crap happens, and things get bad, and you're allowed one day to be pissed off or upset about it, but you have to promise not to give it more than one day. It's like the term analysis paralysis. If you spend too much time on being pissed, you'll get stuck there. Raise your hand if you've ever seen The Wizard of Oz. Good. Remember the scene where Dorothy is walking down the yellow brick road and comes upon the Scarecrow? It's in this scene that the Scarecrow starts to explain the different directions Dorothy could go on the yellow brick road. Well, imagine. She decides to go nowhere. And the movie ends with her sitting there, stuck in her problem, even if it is just left or right. She never gets home. She never defeats the Wicked Witch. That's like unpacking and living in your bad day. And I get it. When you're facing challenges in your personal life or your career, it's easy to get caught up. It's hard to see beyond the very moment you are stuck in. But if you make a conscious effort and commit to not unpacking in the bad day, there is success the next day. This brings me to lesson number 2. Stop asking why and start asking what you can do to change it. If you've ever been to therapy or group counseling, you've probably heard someone say, don't dwell on the why. Well, it's true, at least most of the time. Sometimes the why is important, like the why for finding what you do, or the, oh gosh. Anyway, like finding your why for what you do. But when it comes to overcoming adversity and chaos, you cannot focus on the why. I learned this right after my husband died. You see, I found myself sitting on that same couch in that same house asking, why is this happening to me? And thinking back, I spent so much time asking why. Why did my dad have to commit suicide? Why did I get pregnant so young? And this is such self-limiting thoughts, because whether you find out the reason why or not doesn't change the outcome. If you replace why is this happening to me with what am I going to do to change my situation, the answer becomes an action. And an action will create the change you need to grow and succeed beyond your chaos and adversity. It's this rule that brought me to Virginia, that brought me ultimately to Lightwave, because when I swapped my why for what, I knew I finally needed to get out of that town and make the changes I wanted to see in my life. Last, lesson number 3. The answer is always no unless you ask. Simple, right? Think about it. If you want something, maybe a promotion or a new job, but you never ask your boss to be considered or you never apply to the position, regardless of your skills or qualifications, the answer will be no. Really, when you think about it, you can apply this rule to any opportunity or situation. The key is to believe in yourself and surround yourself with people who believe in you. Now, speaking of people who believe in you, back to that whole silver lining thing. Well, the truth is, I'm standing in my silver lining, right here, right now, with all of you. Even though the first part of my life had hardships and adversity and, quite frankly, a long series of unfortunate events, there were a lot of great things that came from some of those struggles that brought me to my silver lining. When I was pregnant with my son, I started working in his grandmother's, or at the time, soon-to-be grandmother's, dental lab. I was young, knew absolutely nothing about dentistry, or teeth, or OSHA, which was probably the craziest part. But she believed in me and thought I could learn a few things, and that job ultimately brought me to my first job in a dental office. That office started me as a sterilization tech, and then trained me to be an assistant, supported me to go to dental assisting school, and ultimately promoted me to office manager. of the 5-chair single doctor practice in Madison, New Jersey. That opportunity led me to other offices in New Jersey, and I really fell in love with the business of dentistry. And when my husband passed away, that was really a moment where I had to make a decision. Trust me though, I definitely had my fair share of bad days, and maybe even unpacked in 1 or 2 of them. And I definitely asked why a lot. But ultimately, that event is what brought me here, to Lightwave. After I packed up my pity and I started asking what I was going to do to change my situation, doors of opportunity started to open. I met Kim Davis, the, at the time, practice manager of Smiles for Centerville, and I ultimately took over for her at the biggest and busiest dental practice I had ever seen. I met Bruce and Mike and Sandy, and they gave me a chance and saw something in me I didn't yet know was there. And when my personal life brought me to Virginia Beach, again, the people around me believed in me and helped me transition to another Lightwave practice where I met Dr. Lewis and Dr. Pate. But had I sat on that couch in that house in New Jersey and continued to ask why me and feeling bad for myself, I never would have met these exceptional people and been given such an amazing opportunity. And when opportunity knocked again in March of 2021 and the regional director position opened in Hampton Roads, I was able to call on some of these wonderful people to help me be prepared to ask the question, because if I didn't ask, the answer was most certainly no. I remember I called Kim and I said, "Am I crazy for thinking I can do this job?" And without a pause, she said, "Absolutely not." Throughout the process, I leaned on Dr. Lewis, who supported me, Kim and Sandy, who reminded me of how far I've come, and honestly made sure I showed up for those interviews with John and didn't convince myself I wasn't good enough. And now I'm here. I've met some more great leaders and some of my biggest supporters, like John Dema, who ultimately voluntold me to give this speech today, and Gabby Smallwood, who reminded me that this story could inspire someone who's going through something I've been through, or something worse, or something harder for them. And I could maybe have the chance to help them believe that they could get through it too. And hopefully I was able to do that today. But before I go, I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes that has lived in my phone for years, and if nothing else has resonated with you today, hopefully this will. Don't fear failure. Fear being in the exact same place next year as you are today. Thank you.
This is me.